Welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to give you multiple choice questions and answers. This is the introduction to psychology. Before I start, I'd like to thank you all for viewing these videos. And for those who have subscribed, I'd like to thank you. Continue subscribing so that we can continue churning out this content. The first question reads, B.F.Skinner viewed behavior as a function of. When you look at the four alternatives, genetics, cognition, environmental contingencies, and emotions, for you to be able to tackle this question, you have to understand to which school of thought did B.F. Skinner belong to. And if you have been reading your notes, you realize that B.F. Skinner was a behaviorist. So all behaviorists, they believe that behavior is a function of environmental contingencies. So all these other alternatives do not answer the question. So the answer is environmental contingencies. And then we move to the second question. The method used to study one's own conscious mental experiences in structuralism is known as A. Conditioning, introspection, psychoanalysis, behaviorism. The key word when looking at this question is the method, which is the method of study, and the other is structuralism. So for you to answer correctly, you have to know the method of study for structuralism. In this case, it is not conditioning, neither is it psychoanalysis or behaviorism, but the answer is introspection. Also, if you look closely, you'll notice that psychoanalysis and behaviorism are schools of thought. They are not methods used to study any particular mental experience. So the answer is introspection. The third question reads, which of the following does not promote the progress of psychology as a science? You have to be able to understand that psychology is a science, and as a science, there are certain characteristics that make it a science. So when you look at this question, which of the following does not promote the progress of psychology as a science? You have to check whether all these alternatives, any of these alternatives does not promote the progress of psychology as a science. The first one, criticizing initial findings. This is a characteristics of a science. After doing your research, you have to criticize. So this promotes psychology as a science. Providing alternative interpretations. It also promotes psychology as a science. Relying on common sense explanations of observations. This does not. Conducting further research. This promotes the progress of psychology as a science. So the correct answer would be C. Number 4, the theory of natural selection most influenced which of the following schools of thought? A. Functionalism, B. Humanism, C. Structuralism, D. Cognitivism. When you look at these four alternatives, the keyword most influenced. So functionalism, yes, it was influenced by natural selection. Humanism, not to such an extent. Structuralism and cognitivism. So the correct answer would be A, functionalism. But if you had behaviorism as one of the two, Between functionalism and behaviorism, you would also choose functionalism. But if you have behaviorism as an alternative, and these other these other three, you would automatically also choose behaviorism. So you have to read widely so as to understand the key concepts. Number 5, John Locke believed that infants have no ideas or thoughts until they're exposed to experience. This view is most consistent with that of A. Sigmund Freud, B. Wolfgang Kohler, C. Charles Darwin, D. John B. Watson. So you have to remember John Locke is a philosopher. These are the philosophers that influenced the study of psychology. And he believed that infants have no ideas or thoughts until they're exposed to experience. This view is most consistent with that of, when you look at Sigmund Freud, his views are not consistent with this suggested notion, because if you remember, Sigmund Freud talks of the unconscious experience. Wolfgang Kohler, again, he does not. He's a Gestalt psychologist. Charles Darwin, if you remember, Darwin talks of natural selection. John J.B. Watson is a behaviorist. He talks of experience. So in this case, this is the correct answer. Number 6, psychology was born of two parents, dash and dash. When you look at the alternatives, philosophy and physics, philosophy and physiology, philosophy and humanism, behavior and functionalism. If you have read your module correctly, you realize this is not the answer. D. Philosophy and humanism is not philosophy, yes, but not humanism. Philosophy and physics, philosophy, yes, but not physics. So the correct answer would be philosophy and physiology. Number 7, the person considered by many to be the father of the Gestalt movement was. When you look at the alternatives, before you even think of anything, you have to check whether any of these is not a Gestalt psychologist. When you look at B.F.Skinner, as you are now well aware, is a behaviorist, so it's not. Carl Rogers is a humanist, so he's not. Wilhelm Wundt is a structuralist, so he's not. So the correct answer would be Max Wertheimer. Number 8, in Freud's theory of personality, A, the ego obeys the reality principle. The id is the executive of the personality. The superego mediates between the demands of the id and the ego. The ego obeys the pleasure principle. For you to understand this question, or to correctly answer it, you have to know the theory of personality according to Sigmund Freud. And in this case, you have to understand the issues of the id, ego, and superego, the relationship between the three. So in this case, the ego obeys the reality principle. Id is the executive of the personality. Superego mediates between the demands of the id and the ego. The ego obeys the pleasure principle. In this case, this is not the correct one. The id is not the executive of the personality, and neither does the ego obey the pleasure principle. but the answer would be the superego mediates between the demands of the id and the ego. So we have to read on this issue if you have not understood it well. Number 9, the data that Freud used to develop psychoanalysis came from the use of A. Correlational studies, B. Experimental studies, the case study method, the nomothetic approach. If you have correctly read your studies, you remember that Sigmund Freud, before he developed his theory, he relied mainly on his clients, and he used to record his clients, and then he deduced his theories from those clients. So in this case, he did not carry out correlational studies. And neither did he do experiments. If you remember, one of the criticisms of psychoanalysis is that it does not rely on experiments. Then the nomothetic approach is not also the correct answer, but the answer would be the case study method. Number 10, which one is an odd one out? In this case, the question is saying which of these following is not related to most of the stated individuals. So in this case, you have to know to which school of thought each of them belong to. Carl Rogers is a humanist. Piaget is a cognitivist. Brunner, a cognitivist as well. Broadbent, a cognitivist. So in this case, which one is the odd one out? It's Carl Rogers. Because all of these three guys belong to one school of thought, and he is a humanist. So that's the odd one out. Number 11. Number 11. Which of the following is not a defense mechanism? When you look at this question, you have to remember defense mechanisms are talked about in psychoanalysis. And a defense mechanism, these are mental processes that attempt to resolve conflict among drive states and external realities. They usually help in moderating emotion produced by stress and help to reduce individual trauma. In this case, we have identification, regression, containment, and displacement. From the module and your notes, you realize that identification, this is a defense mechanism, as well as regression and displacement. So in this case, the correct answer would be containment. I urge you to read widely so as to know what we mean by identification, regression, displacement. There are so many defense mechanisms, so you have to read widely. The next question, number 12. The dash represents reason or rationality according to Freud. A, defense mechanism, id, superego, and then ego. From your module, you realize that all these three, they represent the personality structure according to psychoanalysis. So defense mechanism automatically goes out id, superego, and ego. The id is the primitive part of human personality from which the superego and ego emanate from, and the ego is the one that represents reason and rationality. So the correct answer would be ego. And the superego, This is the third part of personality, and it is the storehouse of individual values and morals. So the correct answer would be D. Number 13, the three modes of processing information, namely enactive, symbolic, and iconic, were proposed by A. Brunner, Wundt, Jung, and Piaget. Remember, when we talk about processing information, we are talking issues related to the cognitive school of thought. So when you look at the four, Brunner, Wundt, Jung, and Piaget, automatically Wundt goes out. Remember, Wundt is a structuralist. Carl Jung is a psychoanalyst. You are left with Piaget and Brunner. And Brunner is the correct answer. You have to read widely and understand what we mean by enactive, iconic, and symbolic. Number 14, cognitive engineering is a discipline that studies the contribution of cognitive factors to job performance. Historically, this has been known as A. Genetic engineering, eugenics, human factor psychology, factor analysis. The correct answer would be human factors psychology, and all the other three fall to the wayside. So you have to understand what we mean by eugenics, genetic engineering, and factor analysis. And number 15, operant conditioning is also known as classical conditioning, trial and error learning, cognitive learning, respondent learning. Remember, operant conditioning is the opposite of classical conditioning. So automatically you cancel classical conditioning, just as we also cancel trial and error, cognitive learning, no, and the correct answer would be respondent learning. Number 16, who carried out experiments on the mentality of apes? Wertheimer, Kohler, Rubia, Kafka. You have to be able to understand from which school of thought all these four emanate from. And the correct answer here would be Kohler. As a homework, you have to understand and read Kafka, Rubia, and Wertheimer are. But they all emanate from the Gestalt school of thought. Number 17. Gestaltism came into being as an alternative to structuralism, functionalism, and behaviourism. In which country? France, Germany, America, Britain. The correct answer would be Germany. You might have a similar question that would read something like Gestaltism is true Germany, just as behaviourism is true, that's America. So you have to be conversant of these issues. Number 18, the Dash movement was formally launched in 1912 by Wertheimer. Functionalism, structuralism, gestaltism, behaviourism. Automatically, you cancel functionalism and structuralism as well as behaviourism. You are left with gestaltism. And this movement was founded in Germany. Number 19, Cha-Shou-Tao is an example of an A. acrostics formula memory shaker acronym. This question belongs to the cognitive school of thought, and we have to know what acrostics are. Formula, no. Memory shaker, no. The correct answer would be acronym. This is whereby one tries to remember a certain element or issues through each letter represents a certain element. And if you remember from your O-level mathematics, that's where you get Joshua Tao. Number 20, who described the mind as a tabula rasa? Tabula rasa, that's a blank slate. A. Francis Galton. B. Wilhelm Wundt. C. John Locke. D. Kurt Kafka. It's not Francis Galton, neither is it Wilhelm Wundt or Kurt Kafka. The correct answer would be John Locke. So you have to read widely so as to be able to distinguish what each of these individuals did. So that brings us to the end of this multiple choice questions and answers. Thank you for viewing, and I urge you to subscribe to our channel so that we may continue to give you more of these videos. If you have anything, comments, issues, you are free to comment. Thank you so much.